My name is Sophie. I am 29 years old. In the world of high-end perfumery, they call me the Nose, the invisible ghost who constructs memories out of molecules. But to my mother, I was just the factory worker in the basement. For 7 years, I lived in a windowless lab, staining my hands with jasmine absolute and ode, building maison vents from a kitchen experiment into a global luxury brand. My sister Clara did nothing but spray herself with my creations and smile for cameras. She was the face. I was okay with that arrangement until the day my mother sat me down in her velvet-lined office and told me I was being erased. She slid a contract across the desk that transferred my title, my equity, and my life's work solely to Clara. Her reason wasn't business. It wasn't merit. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Sophie, you have to understand. Clara is a single mother. She needs this legacy to secure the children's future. You, you can always make something else." She stripped me of my empire because I didn't have children to feed. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply smiled, picked up the pen, and signed the paper. My mother thought she was saving her favorite daughter. She had no idea she had just handed the company to a captain who didn't know how to steer, right before a hurricane hit. To understand the magnitude of what I signed away that day, you have to understand the smell of grass, France, in the summer. It smells of money and lavender, but mostly, it smells of competition. My family didn't start with money. We started with debt and my obsession. When I was 22, I dropped out of a prestigious chemistry program because I realized I didn't want to study reactions. I wanted to bottle emotions. I spent my savings on raw ingredients, Bulgarian rose, ambergris, sandalwood, and set up a laboratory in the damp basement of our rental house. I spent thousands of hours perfecting a single scent, L'aube, the dawn. It was a masterpiece. Complex, haunting, expensive. My mother, Isabel, smelled the profit before she smelled the art. She was a failed actress with a taste for champagne and a talent for manipulation. She took one look at me, frizzy hair, chemical burns on my fingers, introverted, and decided I wasn't marketable. "You are the engine, Sophie," she told me, "but nobody wants to see the engine. They want to see the hood ornament." Enter Clara, my older sister. She was beautiful, charismatic, and completely vapid. She had just gone through a messy public divorce from a minor celebrity and moved back home with her two toddlers. She needed a job, a purpose, and an income. My mother decided Clara would be the founder. We launched Maison Vance with Clara's face on every billboard. She gave interviews talking about her inspiration, her late nights in the lab, her genius. She couldn't tell the difference between vanilla and tonka bean, but she could sell ice to a polar bear. I stayed in the basement. I formulated. I quality controlled. I created the next 5 bestsellers. The company exploded. We moved from the rental house to a chateau. We opened boutiques in Paris and New York. For 7 years, I let them take the credit. I told myself it was for the family. I told myself I didn't want the spotlight anyway. I was paid a salary, a good one, but nothing compared to the millions Clara and my mother were skimming off the top for their executive lifestyles. Then came the acquisition offer. A massive luxury conglomerate wanted to buy 49% of Maison Vance for a staggering sum. But they had conditions. They wanted to secure the intellectual property. They wanted to know who owned the formulas. That was when my mother called the meeting in the library of the chateau I had paid for. The room smelled of old paper and Clara's overly sweet perfume, a cheap drugstore brand she wore because she actually hated my complex scents. "Sophie, sit down," my mother said, gesturing to a stiff leather chair. Clara was already sitting, looking teary-eyed and fragile, dabbing at her nose with a silk handkerchief. "We have a situation," my mother began. "The investors. They are worried about the structure of the company. They think having two sisters involved is messy. They want a single point of authority." "Okay," I said, sipping my water. So Clara steps down as the face, and I take over as the CEO. I am the creator, after all. Clara let out a sob. My mother sighed, looking at me like I had just kicked a puppy. Sophie, be realistic. You aren't a CEO, you are a scientist. You belong in the lab. Clara is the brand, and more importantly, she is vulnerable right now. Vulnerable? I asked. She drives a Bentley. She is a single mother, my mother snapped. Her ex-husband is threatening to sue for custody. She needs to show assets. She needs to show stability. If we put the company in her name, all of it, she secures the children's future. The investors prefer her public profile anyway. She pushed the contract toward me. We need you to sign over your founder's shares and your voting rights to Clara. You will stay on as head perfumer, of course. Same salary. But the equity, the ownership, it goes to your sister. I looked at the paper. It was a complete abdication. I was giving away a $50 million asset for $0. You are asking me to give her my life's work, I said quietly. Because she decided to have kids, and I didn't. It is not a punishment, Sophie, Clara sniffed. It is protection. You know I can't do anything else. You are a genius. You can always start over. I can't. If I lose this, I lose my babies. It was the ultimate weapon, the grandchildren, the innocent victims. I looked at my mother. You really think this is fair? I think it is necessary, she said cold eye. You are strong, Sophie. You don't need the safety net. Clara does. Family protects the weakest link. I stared at the contract. I read the clauses: transfer of all operational control, transfer of brand assets. But then I noticed what wasn't there. The contract demanded the transfer of the formulas. But in the world of high perfumery, a formula isn't just a list of ingredients. It is a process. It is the temperature, the aging time, the specific supplier for the raw harvest. I kept all of that in a physical book, a leather-bound journal I called the Nose's Log. It wasn't digital. It wasn't on the company server. It was in my bag. And the contract didn't explicitly mention the physical log. It just said, intellectual property currently on file. I looked at Clara, who was watching me with greedy, wet eyes. I looked at my mother, who had sold me out for a grandchild's smile. Okay, I said. My mother blinked. Okay? I will sign, I said. On one condition. Anything, Clara said, leaning forward. I want a sabbatical, I said. 6 months, I am tired. If I am giving up ownership, I want a break before I come back to work as, what did you call it? An employee? My mother smiled, relieved. Of course, darling. Take 6 months. Travel. Find yourself. Clara can handle the day-to-day operations. The factory runs itself at this point. The factory runs itself. That was the most ignorant thing she had ever said. The factory ran because I inspected every barrel of essential oil that came through the door. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name. There, I said, sliding the paper back. It is all yours, Clara. The brand, the money, the future. Clara grabbed the paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. Thank you, Sophie. You won't regret this. I am going to take this company to the moon. I am sure you will, I said. I stood up and walked out of the library. I went straight to the lab in the basement. I didn't pack boxes. I didn't take samples. I walked over to the server rack where we stored the digital backups of the basic ingredient lists. I pulled the hard drives. I didn't destroy them. That would be illegal. I simply reformatted them to the factory settings, wiping the work-in-progress folders. Then, I picked up the leather journal from my desk. The Nose's Log. The only record of the exact chemical modifications required to make our perfumes shelf-stable and hypoallergenic. I put it in my tote bag. I walked out the back door of the chateau, got into my car, and drove away. I didn't tell them that the lavender harvest this year had been affected by a fungus and required a specific chemical adjustment to neutralize the bitter after scent. I didn't tell them that the supplier for our signature amber had changed their extraction method, requiring a 20% reduction in the formula to avoid skin irritation. I let them have the ship. I just took the compass. I spent the next 6 months in a small, sun-drenched villa on the Amalfi Coast. I didn't make perfume. I didn't think about business. I drank wine, ate fresh pasta, and watched the ocean. For the first time in 7 years, my hands didn't smell like chemicals. They smelled like freedom. Back in Grasse, however, the storm I had predicted was gathering speed. I didn't need to be there to see it. I could watch the shipwreck in real time through the glowing screen of my phone. For the first 3 months, things seemed fine. Clara posted photos of herself in the lab, holding beakers filled with colored water, wearing a pristine white coat that looked like a costume. The captions were full of buzzwords: innovation, new era, boss mom. My mother gave interviews about how the transition was seamless, how the family legacy was stronger than ever. But perfume is not like wine. It doesn't get better if you just leave it alone. It is volatile. It is chemistry. And chemistry doesn't care about your marketing budget. The first crack appeared in month 4. I saw a review on a fragrance forum I used to frequent. A longtime customer wrote, "Is it just me, or does the new batch of Loeb smell metallic? It lacks the warmth it used to have." Then came another. "I sprayed this on my wrist and it smells like vinegar and burnt sugar. What happened to the formula?" I knew exactly what happened. The lavender harvest. Without the specific enzyme adjustment I had noted in my missing logbook, the natural compounds in the lavender were oxidizing. They were turning sour in the bottle. But Clara didn't know that. And instead of investigating, she did what she always did. She doubled down on the image. She launched a massive PR campaign for a limited edition, gold label run of our best-selling scent, specifically designed for our exclusive partnership with the Vermilion, a 6-star hotel chain in Dubai. This contract was the crown jewel of the company. It was worth $10 million a year. I sat on my patio in Italy and watched Clara's livestream launching the gold label. "We have enhanced the formula," Clara announced to a room full of reporters, flashing her perfect smile. "We decided to source a rarer, more potent amber to give our clients the luxury they deserve." I nearly dropped my phone. Rarer amber? There was no such thing available on the market right now. The only alternative to our specific supplier was a synthetic compound from China that was notorious for being unstable if mixed with high concentrations of alcohol. She hadn't enhanced the formula. She had cut costs. She had swapped my expensive natural ambergris for cheap, volatile synthetic sludge, probably to boost the profit margins to impress the new investors. 2 weeks later, the bomb went off. It didn't start with a bad review. It started with a lawsuit. I was waking up to the sound of seagulls when my phone started vibrating. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was Dubai. I let it go to voicemail. Then my email pinged. It was a Google alert for Maison Vance. Headline: Luxury Hotel Guests Report Chemical Burns from High-End Fragrance. I clicked the link. The article described a nightmare. Dozens of VIP guests at the Vermilion had used the complimentary gold label perfume in their suites and developed severe, blistering red rashes within minutes. The synthetic amber had reacted with the oxidized lavender, creating a mild acid when exposed to body heat. The hotel had pulled every bottle. They were terminating the contract. They were suing for damages. And the French regulatory agencies were opening an investigation into product safety. My phone rang again. This time it was my mother. I stared at the screen. I hadn't spoken to her since I walked out of the chateau. I swiped answer. "Sophie?" Her voice was a ragged whisper. She sounded like she had aged 20 years. "Hello, Mother," I said, pouring myself a coffee. "How is the Empire?" "You have to come home," she sobbed. "It is a disaster. They are ruining us. The press, the hotel. They are saying the perfume is poison." I read the news, I said. It sounds like Clara made some interesting chemical choices. Synthetic amber, Mother? Really? Did she think nobody would notice the pH shift? She didn't know, my mother wailed. She is not a chemist. She was just trying to improve the margins. She thought it was all the same liquid. It is not liquid, I said cold-eye. It is science, and you fired the scientist. We didn't fire you, we gave you a sabbatical. She took a breath, trying to steady herself. Listen, Sophie, you have to fix this. You have to come back and tell the press that this was a bad batch, that it was a supplier error. You can fix the formula. You can make it safe again. Why would I do that? I asked. I don't own the company, remember? You gave it to Clara. Let the CEO fix it. She can't, my mother's voice cracked. And there is something else. Something worse. I waited. The hotel chain, she whispered. The contract stated that every batch of gold label had to be personally inspected and signed off by the nose. By you. I know, I said. That is a standard quality control clause. But I didn't sign off on that batch. I was in Italy. Silence stretched on the line. Heavy, terrified silence. Mother, I said, my voice dropping. Who signed the quality control certificates? Clara was panicked, my mother cried. The shipment was late. The investors were pushing for revenue. She thought it was just a formality. She traced your signature from an old document. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. Forgery. It wasn't just a breach of contract. It wasn't just negligence. It was fraud. Clara hadn't just ruined the perfume. She had committed a crime. And because she was the CEO, she was personally liable. She forged my signature on a batch of toxic chemicals, I summarized. And now that people are injured, she needs the real me to step in and say, what? That I actually did sign it? That I am the one responsible for burning the skin off billionaires? You have to save her, my mother screamed. They are talking about prison, Sophie, fraud, negligence. She has children, my grandchildren. You can't let her go to jail over a signature. You want me to take the fall, I said, marveling at the audacity. You want me to tell the authorities that I approved the formula so that Clara can claim she was just following my expert instructions. You want me to destroy my reputation as a perfumer to save your golden child from her own greed. You are the genius, she pleaded. You can bounce back. People will forgive a crazy artist who makes a mistake. But Clara, this will end her. Please, Sophie. For the family. For the family. The phrase that had cost me everything. I will come to the office tomorrow, I said. Thank God, my mother wept. Thank God, we will have the lawyers there. We can draft a statement. I will see you at 10, I said. I hung up. I booked a flight to Nice for that afternoon. I packed my bag, and in the bottom, wrapped in silk, I packed the nose's log. The next morning, I walked into the headquarters of Maison Vance. The atmosphere was funereal. Staff members were whispering in corners, looking terrified. The phones were ringing off the hook, unanswered. I walked into the executive boardroom. My mother and Clara were sitting at the long mahogany table. Clara looked destroyed. Her eyes were swollen shut, her hair unwashed. She looked nothing like the glamorous face on the billboards. Next to them sat the family lawyer and two men I didn't recognize, investigators from the regulatory board. She is here, my mother said, standing up. My daughter, the nose. She can explain everything. Clara looked up at me, hope desperate and pathetic in her eyes. Sophie, she choked out. Tell them. Tell them it was a mix-up with the suppliers. Tell them you signed the batch before you left. The investigator turned to me. Ms. Vance, is this true? Did you authorize the use of synthetic amber in the gold label batch? Is this your signature on the QC documents dated last month? He slid the forged document across the table. It was a good forgery. Clara had practiced. I looked at the paper. I looked at Clara, who was holding her breath, praying I would be the safety net one last time. I looked at my mother, who had taught me that my only value was in service to my sister. I reached into my bag and pulled out my leather journal. "This," I said, placing the heavy book on the table, "is my personal log. It documents every formula I have ever created, every supplier I have ever used, and every batch I have ever signed off on for the last 7 years." I opened it to the last page. The date was 6 months ago. "My last entry was on November 14th, I told the investigator. "The day I was removed from the company and handed over all operational control to my sister." I flipped the book closed. "I have been in Italy for 6 months. I did not sign that document. I did not authorize that formula. And I would never, under any circumstances, use synthetic amber. It is an amateur mistake." The room went dead silent. "Sophie!" my mother shrieked. "What are you doing?" I looked at her. "I am telling the truth, Mother. You wanted the face of the company to run the company. Well, she ran it. This is her work, not mine." The investigator looked at Clara. "Ms. Clara Vance, if you forged this signature to bypass safety regulations, that is a criminal offense." Clara started to hyperventilate. But she is my sister. She is supposed to help me." "I helped you for 7 years," I said calmly. "I made you rich. I made you famous. All you had to do was not break it. But you got greedy. You thought what I did was easy. You thought you could cut corners, and no one would smell the difference." I turned to the investigator. "I am prepared to testify that the signature is a forgery. And I have the flight records and passport stamps to prove I wasn't even in the country when that batch was mixed." I stood up. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have a meeting. The Obsidian Collection, the hotel chain you just poisoned, has been calling me. Apparently, they want to launch an exclusive line with a perfumer they can actually trust." I walked to the door. "Sophie!" my mother screamed, running after me. "You can't do this! You are destroying the family!" I opened the door and looked back at the wreckage of the empire I had built. "I didn't destroy it," I said. "I just stopped holding it up." I walked out of that boardroom and didn't look back, but the sound of my mother weeping echoed in the hallway like a ghost. I didn't stay to watch the police arrive. I didn't stay to see my sister, the glamorous face of the brand, be escorted out in handcuffs for corporate fraud and reckless endangerment. I read about it the next morning in the headlines, just like everyone else. Perfume heiress arrested. The toxic truth behind Maison Vance. The fallout was nuclear. The investigation revealed that Clara hadn't just forged one signature. She had cut corners on almost every product line to siphon money for her lifestyle. The pure rose oil was diluted with synthetic fillers. The aged sandalwood was chemically accelerated. She had turned a luxury house into a house of cards, and when the wind blew, it didn't just fall, it incinerated. Maison Vance filed for bankruptcy within the month. The assets were seized to pay the lawsuits from the victims at the hotel. The chateau, the cars, the inventory, everything was auctioned off. My mother lost her status, her home, and her reputation. She went from being the grand matriarch of Grasse to a pariah that no socialite would be seen with. As for me, I didn't go back to the basement. 2 days after the boardroom disaster, I sat on a terrace overlooking the Mediterranean with the CEO of the Obsidian Collection. He was a man who appreciated authenticity. "I fired your sister," he told me, swirling his espresso. "Not just because she burned my guests, but because she insulted my intelligence. She thought a label was enough." He looked at me. "I want the person who makes the liquid. I want the nose." I signed a contract that day. Not as a ghostwriter, not as a silent partner. I launched my own label, simply called Sophie V, no models, no airbrushed billboards. The packaging was minimalist, clear glass and heavy black stoppers. The marketing campaign was just one sentence, nothing to hide. It became an overnight sensation. The perfume industry was tired of celebrity gimmicks. They were hungry for something real. My first collection sold out in 48 hours. The critics called it A return to artistry. 6 months later, I bought a small vineyard property on the outskirts of Grasse. It wasn't a chateau. It was a working farm with fields of jasmine and tuberose. I built a glass-walled laboratory in the middle of the field so I could work in the sunlight. I haven't spoken to Clara or my mother since that day in the office. I heard through lawyers that Clara avoided prison time by pleading guilty and testifying that she was under immense financial pressure, but she is banned from serving as a corporate officer for 10 years. She lives in a small apartment now, working retail. My mother moved in with her. I imagine the two of them in that small space, suffocated by the scent of their own resentment. They occasionally try to reach out through mutual acquaintances, sending messages about forgiveness and starting over. I delete them. I learned the hard way that some ingredients don't blend. You can't mix oil and water, and you can't mix genuine love with transactional greed. Sometimes, when I am in the lab, mixing a new base note of cedar and vetiver, I think about the empire they stole and destroyed. I don't feel angry anymore. I feel relieved. They wanted the golden egg so badly they killed the goose, never realizing that the goose was the only thing that mattered. I capped the bottle in my hand, labeled it Resilience, and set it on the shelf. The air in my lab was clean, complex, and entirely mine. And that is the sweetest scent of all. Please note that this is a fictional story collected and edited by us for entertainment and educational purposes, aiming to promote emotional awareness, empathy, and understanding. It is absolutely not intended to spread hatred, offend, or cause harm. The story of Sophie teaches us that talent is an asset that cannot be stolen. People can take your money, your title, and even your credit, but they cannot take your ability to create. It also reminds us that shortcuts and appearances eventually collapse. True success is built on substance, and true family supports your light rather than trying to steal it. Now, I want to ask you, if you were Sophie, would you have exposed your sister's forgery to the investigators, knowing it would send her to jail? Or would you have tried to handle it privately to save the family name? Do you think talent always wins in the end? Leave your opinion in the comments below so we can discuss it together. Remember to like and subscribe to Revenge Rain to catch more compelling stories. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.